I'm Debz Hobbs-Wyatt. I'll just do a really brief introduction. I've not done this before. I have done a few things because I'm an award-winning short story writer. I do have an agent, and it's my second novel that I'm going to talk to you about. One of the things I just wanted to say about this novel is it started life as a short story almost 20 years ago, believe it or not, when I was at the beginning of this journey. And I always felt that I developed it into a novel, but always felt it had something, but I wasn't a good enough writer. So the lesson is tenacity and hard work, sometimes knowing when to put it to one side. And the reason it was probably difficult is because it's an African-American civil rights novel. And obviously I'm white and British, and I was choosing subject matter not easy, but I couldn't have done it justice then. But eventually in 2020, during lockdown, while recovering from breast cancer surgery, I knew it was time to do it, and I spoke to my agent. And so that's what If Crows Could Talk. So I'm just going to read you the blurb, and then I'll read you a little bit of the first chapter. George Tucker and April Jefferson have never met, but they share a secret. Born the same day, 50 years apart, in the same town in Florida, both are battling demons. George is African-American, now living in Atlanta, having run from Jim Crow, only it seems you can't outrun the past. And April is a white teenager, terrified she will end up like her mother. George's story is set over 50 years, April's over a single year, yet their destinies are tied up together. They must meet. But how is the troubled teenager April the key to unlocking the secrets to George's past? So just to let you know, every chapter's in two parts. It's what I call a convergent timeline. So they start 50 years apart and they gradually come together. So I'm just going to read you the second part of George's part of the first chapter. So just for context, this is the day of George's 15th birthday when something happens that affects his whole life, really. And he doesn't want to go to school. He wants to be a poet, but he doesn't want to go to school on his birthday. But his mum says that there's a surprise for him, and he hopes it's his brother Abe coming back from the Korean War. So the date is March the 12th, 1953, Jacksonville, Florida. George scrapes his feet on the sidewalk, counting the 37 strides from the bus stop to Williams Avenue to the corner, slap, tap, where he cuts across the park. It's 57 less strides if he takes a shortcut. He only goes the long way when he wants to be late, when he's got words in his head and poems he's writing for himself. Words flow when he counts the beat. Even Mr. Lewis says he writes good. He calls him a daydreamer, but when he says it, it's like it's a good thing, not like when Pap says it. He feels the sweat seep into his white cotton shirt. At least there's a breeze now, but it's still too hot. The air smells of orange blossoms, sweet in a sickly way, citrusy. It's the state flower. He wrote a poem about that, the state flower, not as good as Langston Hughes or the other poet Gwendolyn Elizabeth Brooks. Mr. Lewis said she was the first Negro to win the Pulitzer Prize for poetry. Biggest prize there is, and Mr. Lewis says that's really something. By the time he heard of Gwendolyn Elizabeth Brooks, Abe was already fighting in Korea, but he's decided to tell him about it. He's the one who said big changes are coming, how one day everyone's going to go to the same school, sit in the same classroom next to white folks. Abe might not like poetry, but he'd be impressed to know Gwendolyn Elizabeth Brooks won the Pulitzer Prize for poetry, being a Negro and all. George loses count of his strides as he crosses the park. The school is a box with windows, red brick and mostly wood, nothing to write poetry about. At the school gate, he stops and counts crows. There are a lot of them huddled together like they're gossiping. He should write a poem about crows. He thinks how he'll write it down during recess or math. No one cares as long as it looks like you're doing something. George counts 17 strides from the gate to the door of the school. He thinks how there's more crows than kids today. Should have been one less too. He should have gone back the other way once he got the bus, all 37 strides away from the bus stop, and maybe even walk home. Not like anyone will miss him. Chloe isn't in today. George Tucker. Mr. Brown, the school principal, is standing in the schoolyard. Looks like he's watching the crows too. George can see some of the kids already inside the school. Principal Brown is tall and thin, peppery grey hair. He dresses smart, brown suit, shiny shoes, and he dipped his head in George's direction. Don't be late, George Tucker. He thinks how he should have started walking the other way from the bus stop and now it's too late. At least he has a surprise after school. He thinks what he'll say to Abe. He'll hug him first, if that's still allowed now he's 15. His mama wore bright colours, it must mean something. Inside the school, George counts 30 more strides to Mr. Lewis's classroom. Shoes make a different sound on the wooden floor, like a shuffle squeak. The school always smells like soap. He doesn't look too closely. Including him, he thinks there are 5 of them in the class today. Not Chloe, only her twin sister. Mr. Lewis might not be able to tell them apart, but to George, Chloe's way prettier. There are 2 empty seats at the front, no sign of Mr. Lewis. George is 2 minutes late, which means Mr. Lewis is late, and Mr. Lewis is never late. George sits down next to the empty seat at the back, where his best friend is meant to be. It was a bad fight. It was over Chloe. But now neither of them is in school. George decides he doesn't need a best friend. He's got Abe, and tonight he'll be home. George stretches out his long legs under the desk. No one says happy birthday, but they probably don't know. So he looks out into the yard at the crows, thinks about how to start his poem, when he thinks he sees something, movement along the trees, bigger than a crow. But it must be a trick of the light, because when he looks again, all he sees is Principal Brown in the schoolyard looking up. A minute later, he sees Mr. Lewis in his grey suit, that battered leather bag of his under his arm. Next thing, he's talking to Principal Brown. Now they're both looking up. Maybe there are crows on the roof. The clock at the front of the classroom says they're 5 minutes late now. George hears giggles in front of him. He thinks about saying how it's his birthday, but thinks better of it. No Chloe, so now he doesn't feel so sociable. Maybe one day he'll write a poem for Chloe, but now he thinks he needs to not think about that. He needs to think about the new poem. George reaches into his bag, places his notebook and his pencil on the desk. He'll show Abe his poem tonight when he tells him about Gwendolyn Elizabeth Brooks. Abe will be the best birthday surprise, and now has thought about it so much, no other surprise will do. Next thing, he hears the scrape of the chair next to him. Seems like I ain't the only one late today, so he did make it. He still has signs of a black eye. Are they still best friends? Before George can respond, Mr. Lewis appears in the doorway. Flustered, says sorry, mumbles something about his pregnant wife making him late. As he takes the register, he seems distracted, keeps on looking out into the yard. Next thing, he says he forgot something, says he'll be right back. He leaves his brown leather briefcase on the table. George wonders what he forgot. He thinks maybe he should say something about the fight, his black eye, about Chloe, but instead he opens his notebook. I dream a world where man no other man will scorn. Langston Hughes is a fine poet. Maybe one day George will be a fine poet. He writes the title of his new poem, ponders on the first line. He needs to write it so he can show his brother. But tonight it won't be Abe standing on his doorstep. Seems Grandmama was right that life can turn on a dime. It will be 2 men wearing uniforms, and George will never finish his poem or know what his birthday surprise was meant to be. There you go, ...